All right, good morning on this apparently a little chillier day today. Um, this is not a good day to forget my coat in the car, but life will go on. So I wanted to point out a couple of things. So I did post a video, which is really just the syllabus from Monday. It does take a little bit of time to convert those and upload them. And unfortunately, our lab is fairly busy sometimes, so it makes it a little more interesting, but we will try to get those up as quick as possible. So two things we really want to look at today. So we want to look at a couple of history pieces, and then we have a couple of assignments that we need to work on this week. So we're going to talk about ethics, we're going to talk about history. So I'm going to go through some of these really, really quick. I am not going to touch every piece of it. I encourage you to read through these. So I don't really have any hardcore reading per se this first time, but I wanted you to look at what's going on. Some of these have links to other things. So this one's got a link for something from code.org. I think it's kind of an interesting video. So watch some of those, look at those. And if you don't think programming is important, think about yesterday when the entire nation was grounded, all of their flights, because they had a database with a programming error at the FAA. Oops, 11,000 flights canceled yesterday. So it's a little on the crazy side. So let me kind of skim through these for you and just talk about. So in here at the beginning, I try to put in things about some key terms, and so we'll look at a couple of those. Some of these you guys already know, but early computers, please read about them. It's kind of interesting. So really all a computer is something that takes in information, processes it, and outputs. So the simplest computer you could have is something like a wall thermostat. It gets information, it reads the temperature, and then it outputs a command to either increase or decrease the temperature. So it sends a signal back to your furnace on what to do. That's a computer. Well, we know we've gotten a little more complex than that by now, but if we really think it all the way down, that's all a computer does. So we have to have some way to tell it what to do, and we use programming languages. And so word cloud, kind of interesting, shows you a lot of the different languages out there. There are well over 600 plus languages out there now. More to being developed all the time. One of the ways we distinguish them is high level and low level. So the higher the level, the more abstract or separated from the hardware it is. Typically, it's more English-like. And so we're going to use Python, which is going to look very much like English. On the other hand, all the way at the other end, the low level, so you have things like hex editors, where you're actually editing individual zeros and ones and things and telling a computer how to run at that level. So for most people, it's far easier to have a sentence that says, hey, I want to do this, than it is to have, all right, I need to access this memory location and insert 4 bytes there and move stuff around that way. So we look at most of our current languages are pretty abstract. So here's our machine language in hexadecimal. So hexadecimal is base 16. Our computers run on zeros and ones. Base 16 is a shortcut to get in there where we actually use, but over on the other side, here we have a language that pushes stuff around, but it doesn't look like a abstract language or a high level. So the programming languages, kind of the history, we've had languages in different things from the 50s that we've started to use. So if we look at the 50s, we had things like Fortran, which still exists, Lisp still exists, COBOL, RPG, BASIC began, and now we'll move to the idea that we can do things where, in some cases, even drag and drop. So in a lot of high schools and middle schools, they'll teach programming concepts using a lot of drag and drop tools, which are kind of interesting because it shows you how things flow. And so that's the complete far side of that. You don't even need to type in some cases for those. we've moved a lot. We will show you an example of that when we start looking at some other pieces here. Oh. All right, so history of programming, there's just a few notes on there, and then there is an assignment here. So I want to look at it and leave it with you guys. So here is your assignment for this particular class. Now, what I did to try to break it up a little bit is you're given a language assignment based on your last name, whatever your last name is. So if you have a name that ends in F, so F would land somewhere hopefully over here, so you need to talk about C#. So read all the instructions, creative title and slide. So you're actually going to do this as a PowerPoint or other slideshow. If you use something that is not PowerPoint, you need to export it out as a PDF for me to view it. So if you're anybody in here a Mac user, none of you guys. All right, so if you do it in whatever Macs, what is it, Keynote or something? That's okay. Okay, perfect. All right, so there are other programs out there. If you use some of those, just export it as a PDF, and then you can import it. So I have some directions, and where you're going to reply. So this links to a discussion board. So your reply here links directly into a discussion board, or should. We're hopeful. We're trying some new stuff here at Kansas, so we will see. If you have issues with that, let me know. And that assignment is due 11:59 Central Standard Time on Sunday. All right. There is also this assignment. I know, man, multiple assignments. So we're going to do another presentation, and this one is about Python. This one is a traditional assignment where you're going to send it into essentially the Dropbox area where other people can't see it. I am going to pull those up so we can then tell you a little more about Python next week and look at what you guys are doing. So you have the ability to do either a PowerPoint if you want to, or you can do it in paragraph form, whichever one you prefer. So, all right. So those are the two assignments. There is also then a short quiz. Now, here's what I want to point out. Although this says it's 4 points, when we take all the quizzes at the end of the year, that is 10% of the grade. So even though it says 4 points, it doesn't equate necessarily because we're going to proportion them out at the end. And I'm not sure how Canvas does that on the fly. So we're kind of winging it a little bit here to try to figure out some of those. So in this case, it's 4 simple questions. So who's contributed to the father? What programming languages? So which is not a high level. So you should be able to answer those really, really easily and really, really quickly. Do what? Yes, due on Sunday also. Everything in the week one, I set one due date. So the only exception is those things that you need to respond to in discussion boards. If you can do them by Friday, that allows other people to respond to your post. If everybody waits till Sunday at 11 o'clock, it's hard to really get a discussion board. So, a couple of things you have. This assignment, you have the Python, so 2 history assignments. You didn't know you were taking a history class yet. There's a programming quiz, and then there's an ethics quiz that's 5 points. So this shouldn't be horrible in terms of time, but I want to talk about ethics. In this class, I kind of hit it in about every class because we're seeing some new things that are happening in the world around us. We see more and more students doing things that are not correct in terms of ethical behavior. We've had several students who are buying their entire class from a company or service that's based overseas, and they're paying for their education that way. Now, is it really you receiving the education? No. And in some cases, some of these overseas services, they're not selling it just to you, but to 10 other students across the country, the same material. And guess what happens? You get, in some cases, very drastic consequences out of that. The best one, though, was the student last year who was paying somebody to do his work somewhere out of an African country, not really sure which one it was, but he's paying for a student to do his work, or another person to do his work in a class, and the guy was turning in assignments that would fail automatically. And it was fairly easy to detect that one. And that particular individual was actually suspended for, I think, a year from our campus. And it will show up on his transcript in the future. So when if he tries to go to other schools, he will also get kind of penalized on that. The worst case of cheating I have ever seen in here was actually, not in this class, but I had in another course. Guy was cheating on every assignment. And he was actually having his coworkers do his stuff for him. All right, well, not a good decision, but we caught on to it, and then we kind of backtracked a little bit. The problem is the guy was working at another university out in California. So not only did he get zeros in the course, and his transcript marked that he was being expelled for plagiarism and academic dishonesty, but he also ended up losing his job at it, because another college is not going to want somebody who's doing that. So one of the things I want to talk about is that ethics piece of what's right and what's wrong. This class becomes a little trickier in that we do a lot of our coding. We use people's work. We use modules from them. We're going to show you places where you can find programs that you can reuse or modify. But we have to make sure you attribute that to the person who did it. So ours is a little trickier because programming really is based on other people's work in a lot of cases, or we're using pieces from that. So it makes it a little trickier on our ethics piece in that. So there's a lot of terms when we talk about ethics / security. We're going to kind of briefly go over a few of these simply because I also encourage you guys to take the cybersecurity course, which has a little more of those. But some of these we know, like a hacker, the person who gains information without permission. Netiquette. So how we behave on the internet. How we behave in sending emails, text messages, and those kinds of things. It really is important. There are far too many stories of people deciding, hey, I'm going to be a smart butt and reply back to somebody, and it ends up biting them in the rear end. So make sure when you use email or anything else that you do think appropriately. So instead of addressing one of your professors as, hey, yo, I won't be in class tomorrow, and yes, I have received that very email, think about who your audience is. When you're applying for a job, hey, yo, I'm sending you my resume. You might want to think about that a little bit. So some of these we can find. So the ACM, the Association for Computer Machinery, it's kind of one of the biggest organizations in the country. They have student memberships and things, all different kinds of things. So it actually has some codes and some guidelines that are really a kind of a handy way to do it. They have a quick code of conduct of, so, avoid harm, contribute to society, be honest, be fair, don't discriminate, okay? Respect the work required to produce new ideas. Here's this piece where we say, hey, there's a really neat piece of code out here on SourceForge. I'd like to borrow it from this author because it significantly is faster than my search engine. Can I do that? Make sure you appropriately cite them and use the privacy, confidentiality. So a lot of times at a company, you may be given information that you need to honor that confidentiality. I may have student information that I know about a particular student. I need to honor their confidentiality. So, in professional, strive to achieve high-quality work, high standards of professional competency, contact, and ethics. So none of these are particularly horrible, and they make a lot of sense. It's really a great thing to look at, whether you're in a software coding or in a computer job or not. Most of these really work really well. So If you become a member of this particular group, you're supposed to sign on and sign on to this code. Now, I've never seen them come after anybody for that particular thing, but it just gives us kind of a framework of what might be the right thing to do. Well, if doing it for a code is not good enough, we also need to think about then what are the laws and other pieces behind it. So, information technology laws, so you might want to look at those and read about some of the laws that are out there. There are tons of them. One of the problems is how do we enforce it when you're not in, so it's a code written for U.S. citizens and U.S. territories and states. What happens if you're in Croatia? How do we deal with this? So, identity theft is actually one of the biggest issues we have here right now. What we found is I've had several college students who come here, and all of a sudden they realize that their credit is already cracked, and their parent or a relative have assumed their information and utilized it to do all kinds of loans and things. Again, that was that basic information that got stolen. Now we're seeing it where identity theft is used in medical circumstances. So why take $1,000 on a credit card when I can set up a fake Medicaid billing surgical center and bill hundreds of people for hip surgeries at $50,000 a piece? Wow. Once again, the worst thing is people. And you'll hear that in every class I have. People are the worst thing in terms of security. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into some place and they have the passwords literally hanging on the monitor on a sticky note. And if you look around very carefully, you're going to see that. So, I have a saying in cybersecurity, we're not going to use it in here, but passwords, yes, that one. So, passwords are not necessarily that great, but you do want a long, strong password. So, encryption, we're going to talk about a little more when we start getting into the programming piece. Things to worry about. Oh, great. So, who's watching what I'm doing? Where am I going? What do hackers do? So, things like viruses and worms and spyware. What kind of things can I do to protect yourself? Biggest thing, look up here at the top of your screen for this padlock. If it doesn't have a padlock, it's an unsecure website. In other words, it's not being transmitted securely. So make sure that viruses and spyware, and so we'll talk about some other ones that you need to make sure of, but kind of just getting you started on this journey. So that leads us then to a real quick assignment in ethics. And so there's a quiz here. So again, I think this one's 5 questions. Yeah. Oh. So there is a really short quiz here. The other piece I have that I need you guys to do this week is up in the discussions. So that's where your history of computer programming should land, and it looks like one student has already completed that. So, introductions. Because we're this blended, mixed class of people, I would like you to, and I'll give you guys time in class here in just a second, introduce who you are. Tell us something about your goals, your major, your hometown, what you do at Peru, something to paint a picture of who you are. You can also certainly put in a picture or a link to social media if you would like to. That's one of the things you could do. And we just want to know each other, because I get to meet you guys in person. So I'm talking to the obviously the class here. I get to see you guys, but the online students I don't get to see, and sometimes we don't have that interaction. So I just want to know who everybody is and a little bit about them. So that's really this first week. Now, we have some other pieces we're going to look at here really quickly, but that's where I wanted to look at here. So my next step is I'm going to go to what is going to become your biggest resource. You guys just don't realize it yet, and that is Python.org. So Python.org is the authoritative place where Python develops modifies, changes. Python is kind of an open source effort. In other words, we don't have to pay for most of the software that we're going to use with Python. Now, there are some programs that utilize Python that you may want to purchase if you get really into this, but for the most part, Python can be done very, very easily, and it can all be done in a text editor of some sort. As we get more complicated with our programming, a text editor that's optimized for Python is kind of a nice touch. So it's kind of like using a word processor versus just scribbling things down in Notes, if you've ever done that, or WordPad, or the Mac equivalents of those. So we're going to very quickly start looking at how to download and install. So I'm going to click on this download very quickly. And I want to show you a couple of things when you get ready to download that. There are installers for almost everything that you can possibly have as a computer. So if you have Linux, notice there's not really a Linux version in here. That's because Python gets installed and for the most part sets at the very basic level of Linux. There's a Mac installer, so we can do different types of Windows packages, 32, 34. There is even ones for the old ARM systems if you happen to have one of those. So Python is kind of a universal language that we can use on almost anything. I actually have had a student do it on an Android tablet. They were able to take the entire class. They kind of took it as a challenge. Probably not one I would encourage, but it certainly is one way to do it. So one of the things on here that's kind of interesting is you can look at success stories. So when you start looking at your Python paper, this might be a good place to resource. So where do people use this? We have news. There's events that are happening around in different groups because there's a lot of community pieces. But even up at the top, here's one that's interesting. There's even a jobs board. And what I think is interesting now with a lot of software companies is you don't have to be in an office. The COVID era has changed a little bit the world around us, and a lot of these jobs are actually remote jobs. So these are worldwide. You can narrow them down, but there are far more jobs in Python than that. Not everybody posts there, but it's just kind of an interesting thing to look at and see where some of these places are. So here's one for a data manager in Germany. Most of these are remote databases. University of Chicago. Data scientist for somewhere. So I will tell you that Python, once you get your hands on it, it's a really great scripting language for doing a lot of really quick processes and things. So I know a couple of years ago I got to take a course from some of the engineers at the Omaha Google Data Center. And while they can't tell you a lot about what they do day to day, it's very evident that they're using Python for a lot of their batch activities. So it's a good, quick, great way to do some of it. So all these fun things are up there in the documents. You'll even find each version has its own list of documents, tutorials. And so we're going to utilize some of those. They're all over the place. This is a really great resource for Python. Obviously, it's where all of the authoritative pieces are. So just keep this in mind when we get ready to start downloading. You're going to go in here, download and install a Python environment. And what it's going to look like once you run it is it's going to look like this. So this is part of that Python environment. It's not scary. This is just a shell environment where we're able to type and create content. So color codes it, does some things. So I just told it to print. And what I did was I sent this phrase hello into a function called print that was predefined. Not spectacular, doesn't do a whole lot there, but it's just an interesting way to look at it. So this is when we start programming in Python. This is the environment you're going to be in quite a bit. So this is the shell. So we also have what we look at as batch mode. So if I said new file, I'll put those both up there. This is that idle environment. This is actually where we can write a program. We can run individual commands in here very easily. But this model over here, which just looks like a text editor of some sort, so the same thing, print. So now I can go in and I can save this file, I can look at it, and I can create multiple lines of code easily. This is an intermediate kind of level of text editor, and we'll show you some others as we go that are even better. It still does this, it kind of highlights what it does, and then if I want to go, oh, file, I can save it. One of the challenges is, kind of like your HTML coding, because I know some of you have been in there, is I have to save this file before I can run it over here. So when I click run, if I said this, it says, oh, I got to save that before I can do anything. So, okay, and we'll teach you where some of these things go later. Yes, I do want to override it, because I used that before. And notice when I ran it, it actually comes over here and runs. So we'll get to that. I just wanted to brief you a little bit on what that's going to look like in the really near future. So Python.org is the best resource if you don't have that bookmarked. The only thing I will say with Python, if you're searching for answers, sometimes it's not as easy because it's trying to deal with all kinds of pieces. So sometimes a Google search might reveal a better solution than just looking here, because this is that authoritative piece. So it's kind of like going to the encyclopedia for something, and all you wanted was a word definition. So, Python.org. Our introductions, the assignments for this week. So we ramp up once we get everybody kind of on board, and then we start tackling Python in its native form, and we really go straight out from there. All right. As we go, I'm also going to look at what things do we need to change in the class. So you'll see me pop up a lot of survey type questions eventually and saying, hey, can we do this? How far can I push you? How far can we not? So this first week, so these are your items that you have in here, and I'll record this video and upload it here pretty quickly. All right, any questions? Comments? Anybody want it warmer? Yes.